Hey everyone, host of Shelves, Jeremy Meyer here. If you like the podcast, I thought I'd recommend a couple others for you. If you want to hear more about unproduced scripts, check out Screenplay Archaeology. If you want to hear some other movie or entertainment-related discussion, check out the Entertainment Buffet podcast. If you're interested in some video game discussion, check out my friends over at the Darkcast and darkstation.com. Also be sure to visit some of our friends of the show, the Nerds and Marks podcast and 616 Entertainment. Thank you, and enjoy the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Shelve Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Meyer. Sorry if I sound a little groggy. I am recording this Wednesday at 1:18 a.m. as I have just clocked out for work for my 33rd hour already this week. I'm a little tired, but I wanted to get this episode up as soon as possible because it is my favorite episode of the podcast ever. Today's episode is an interview with David Hayter, who you might know as the voice of Solid Snake in the Metal Gear Solid video game franchise. But he's also, an established screenwriter and has written films such as X-Men and X2 and Watchmen, which is what we're mostly here to talk about today. So, about a week and a half ago or a week ago, my time is all over the place right now. David, he dropped some test footage on Twitter, and you can find it on YouTube if you just search Watchmen test footage. He just, dropped it onto Twitter. It was like, hey, here's the test footage we shot for Watchmen, back in like 2003. And it was, super cool. Like, things like that are what this podcast is based on. Looking at movies that could have been or things that could have been and, kind of analyzing that stuff. So I was like, oh my God, this is like awesome. This is super cool. And Watchmen, obviously, I love the comic and I love the movie. So, I just kind of like tweeted him. I'm like, hey man, this is awesome. Like, I have a podcast that is all about this kind of stuff. Like, I would love to have you on. And, kind of just left it at that. Didn't think I'd get any responses. I do things like that often and usually don't hear anything back. And then the next day I happen to wake up to a DM from David who's like, yeah, man, like, let's do it. There's some stuff I want to get on the record. And I was blown away. What? Blown away that he would take the opportunity to come talk about it. And so, we scheduled it. We finally sat down and talked about it on, I say earlier today, but it's Wednesday. Technically, it was Tuesday yesterday. And yeah, so we had a conversation. We thought it was only going to be like 45 minutes, but we ended up going almost an hour. He was super cool, like a great guy to talk to, had a lot of interesting stories. And, a lot of people are aware of his resume, but maybe don't understand exactly how much we have to thank him for on top of things that we are a fan of that he's done, but just all of these things he's touched and the fact that the comic book movie genre might not even be where it is today without David's work. Comic book movies were kind of in the toilet after Batman and Robin, and then it was like the three punch of Blade, X-Men, and Spider-Man that kind of launched that stuff. So it was, a really great conversation. And, fans of Metal Gear, he does the voice, my childhood cried out when he did every time. It was, super cool. A lot of people say, never meet your heroes, but he was everything I hoped he would be. And, we had a great conversation. So I'm going to go ahead and stop stalling and get into the interview with David Hayter. But before we do that, just get the usual business out of the way. You can follow us on social media at Shelves Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. You can email the show at shelvedfilmpodcast@gmail.com. You want to get in touch for interviews and questions, read them on the show and stuff like that. And then, we have the Patreon. You can find it on our pinned tweet and on the Instagram, patreon.com/shelved. But yeah, so without further ado, here's me talking to David Hayter about Watchmen. Well, first, I just wanted to thank you for doing this because, I'm sure you're a very busy guy. You didn't have to do this, and I always appreciate when people take the time to sit down and have a chat with me.
Well, it's my pleasure. I am not doing many interviews lately, primarily because everybody just wants to talk about Metal Gear, and so the fact that it wasn't about Metal Gear prompted me to say yes. So yeah. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, well, I'll get it out of the way. I'm a big fan.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. It's, big part of my childhood. I loved all that stuff. A lot of my friends are jealous that I'm talking to you right now for that same reason. So.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay.
But, even on top of Metal Gear, this whole podcast is based around screenwriting because that's my interest. That's my goal. That's the thing I'm interested in. Like when I'm watching movies, I'm breaking them down in like a writing perspective. And something I don't know if you get enough credit for is if it wasn't for you, we might not have the MCU today just because of the work you've done in comic book movies and like the state of where comic book movies were when you kind of jumped in with X-Men and X2 and things like that. I know I was not a huge X-Men fan before those first two movies, and that that first movie for me, it was what was that, 2001 when that first one came out?
2000.
Yeah, 2000. I was younger and I was aware of the X-Men. I didn't watch the cartoon growing up because I was a Spider-Man kid, and that first movie was like, okay, I kind of see what's here now, and it was that second one that I was like, oh damn, that like blew me away. And I became
well, thank you.
Yeah, no, so I have you to thank for that. And Batman and Robin kind of tilted the scales one way, and then it was like the three punch of Blade, X-Men, Spider-Man that kind of saved things and brought us where we are today. So
yeah, well, it was, Batman and Robin was one of the worst movies I've ever seen, and that's a shame because I love Joel Schumacher and I love Batman.
Yeah.
And but it just wasn't taken seriously, and so it was it really did. I think we would have made the same movie anyways, but it really drove us to do it in a way that really honored the source material and treated it like real story,
Yeah. How long were you working on X-Men before it? Because I know we've actually covered some like early drafts of it on this podcast. But what was your kind of like stepping into that, and were you going off any of that early stuff, or did you guys just kind of start from scratch?
I came in about 5 or 6 months before we started shooting, and I was just revising the script that had been there before, written by Ed Solomon, and then Chris McQuarrie was the writer on before me. But I did 13 months on the movie, and we just did so much rewriting and revising. Just every day would be a different draft, and Brian always wanted it torn open and revised and changed, and so I did so much work that I ended up getting the sole credit on the movie, but no, we were essentially rewriting what was already there.
Yeah. That movie, the impact was huge. What was that like when that came out? Like, I assume it's just like immediately like, what are we doing next? You know?
Yeah. Well, it completely changed my life. I was nobody. I mean, I was already Solid Snake, but it was my first writing job that I'd ever been paid for, and so the weekend it came out, prior to the weekend it came out, everybody thought it was going to be a disaster, and nobody was really anticipating the hit that it became. Oh yeah, the studio and everybody, were not very confident that it was going to reach people, and then it opened, and I actually remember the moment I was in the Sutton Place Hotel in Toronto, and I got a call from Bryan Singer, and he said, "I'm going to tell you the 3 biggest opening days in history." And the first one was Jurassic Park, The Lost World, and the second one was something else, and the third one was X-Men. And that, I kind of looked at my wife and I was like, "Oh, I think things are going to be all right now."
Yeah.
And so it just completely changed my life. And then they immediately started talking about doing X-Men 2, and we started negotiating that deal. I got offered all sorts of things, and then that's when my agents came to me and said, "What's your dream project?" And I said, "Watchmen. Find out who's got the rights, and let's see what we can do."
Yeah. So, when did you get involved with Watchmen? Like, when did you sign on? Like, what year?
I signed on. I literally signed my first contract with Universal on September 10th, 2001.
2001. So
the day before September 11th.
Oh, geez. That was probably bittersweet.
It was rough because it felt like the ending of the book had just happened in New York, and I figured, beyond my natural horror, and I had an interview that day with an LA Times reporter named Patrick Goldstein, and I was like, "Should we just cancel the interview?" And he's like, "No, I don't even know what else to do." So we just kind of sat in a restaurant and, in shock. And and I kind of thought at that point that they would never make the movie. But we soldiered on. But that's also the reason why I felt from the beginning that I couldn't do the Squid, really. Not because of the Squid, but because of all the dead bodies in Times Square. I the day after I signed my contract, I was like, I just don't think it's right, or it would be in very poor taste to show a bunch of dead bodies in the middle of Times Square at this point in history. And so that's when we started having to rethink the ending.
Weirdly, I never put that connection together until now, which sounds like I'm brain dead.
No, the movie didn't come out for another 8 years.
Yeah, it was 2009.
So the connection was not as intense as it was for me, but yeah, that really had a huge impact on it. And that's part of the reason why it changed.
Yeah. I'll admit I was one of those people that was unfamiliar with Watchmen until that first trailer dropped. And then, Zack Snyder's style, I saw that trailer, like, oh, what is this? And I actually recognized the song because I was a big fan of the Batman and Robin soundtrack. And I was like, oh,
was that in Batman and Robin?
That song. Yeah, it was actually, there were 2 versions of it. There was that version, and then there was like a more like traditional Smashing Pumpkins version. Both are great, honestly. But that was like a remix version that was like tagged onto the end of the soundtrack.
Oh wow, that's cool.
Yeah, and so I read the book before the movie came out, and then I saw them. I don't think I made it to the theater to see it. I saw it later, but I'm a big fan of the Watchmen movie. I know some people are divisive on it, and the ending is probably something I'll ask you about at some point, which I guess you did kind of cover the changing of it or whatever. But what about Watchmen made it like your dream project? I assume it was something. Were you familiar with it like when it came out, or did you come to it later and
just well, it came out when I was 15. The comic books. and I was a big comics fan, and a friend of mine told me about it and said, "Oh my God, you've got to read this." And so I started getting the comics. You know, it's 12 individual comic books, and they came out once a month in 1985, and I just got hooked and was just waiting for each successive issue, and then the final issue didn't come out for months. Like, it was delayed by months. Alan hadn't finished it, and we were all like, what's going to happen? Like, what, what's the ending of this epic story?
That's interesting, because they're kind of doing the same thing. I don't know if you've kept up with Doomsday Clock, the kind of sequel that's happening right now.
I'm aware of it. I haven't read it.
Yeah, it's kind of the same situation. The last issue got delayed. I believe it comes out later this month, but I've actually been really enjoying it, and I'm like waiting for that last issue. But it is kind of mirroring that release. Yeah,
well, that's Watchmen for you, I guess.
Yeah.
And, I was hooked on it. Then I was like, this and Dark Knight Returns are the two greatest comic books I've ever read.
Of course.
And both, came out in the same year, which was amazing. And then in 1997, I produced and starred in a little movie called Burn. And when I was hanging out in my dressing room, somebody gave me their copy of the graphic novel, Watchmen, and I was rereading it, and I was in the middle of making a movie, so I was like, oh my God, I have to make this as a film, even though there was no possibility that I would ever be involved with something that big at that point in my career. The movie I was making cost $217,000.
Yeah.
But I just got to that moment in the book where Rorschach burns the guy in the prison cafeteria and then turns to all the prisoners and says, "None of you understand. I'm not locked up in here with you. You're locked up in here with me."
Yeah.
And I was like, that's the greatest line of movie dialogue I've ever heard, and I have to make this movie somehow. And so that's when I got reignited on it. And then, through a very strange twist of fate, 2 years later, I ended up writing on the movie X-Men, which opened the door to being able to do Watchmen.
Yeah. So you get Watchmen, and it's like, okay, write it. What is that feeling of like, great, I got it. Now I actually have to make this a thing.
Right. It's like when the dog finally catches the car.
Yeah.
He doesn't know what to do with it. Well, I mean, what I had initially pitched it as a miniseries, as an HBO miniseries.
Yeah, I feel like that's been pushed around. That was always like the word for a long time.
Yeah, well, it seemed to be the only way to really do it, to capture all the nuances of it and so on and so forth. And in the end, it probably is. But Larry Gordon was the producer, and he said, "Look, David, I don't know anything about TV. Can you make this into a movie?" And I was like, "I don't know. I'll try." And but basically, what I did was I copied down everything in the book verbatim and translated it into screenplay format. And the first pass was 178 pages or so.
Oof.
And then I said, okay, which is way too long
for reference, they just put out the Avengers Endgame script, which was like 150 pages, which is a lot.
Yeah, 150 pages, you're looking at a 2.5, 3 hour movie, and 178 is nobody's going to make that. And for people's reference, I mean, at the time, an average script was probably 110, 120 pages. Today, an average script is about 100 pages. So it was about 2 times too long.
Yeah.
But I said, on the next pass, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out everything I can cut that isn't like absolutely badass. Like I'm going to leave in every single amazing moment, every great piece of dialogue, and which is pretty much all of it. But there is some stuff in the creation of the, when you're writing a static comic book, there are certain things that you
Yeah.
have to do or say, you know, oh, we're going to go over here or whatever, that you can just do in camera that you don't have to say in dialogue.
You're looking at it as a visual medium, one moving versus one as pictures. So there's things that you can eliminate or condense.
Exactly. So, like, what can I say with the camera that I don't have to take 3 lines of dialogue to say? That sort of thing. So I did that, and I did that pass, and that pass ended up at about 138 pages, and that was pretty much where we wanted it to be, because we knew it was going to be long. We knew it was going to be a 2.5 hour movie. So that was that. But then I did 9 years of wrangling with 4 different studios, trying to not have them ruin it. You know,
Yeah.
like they'd all want changes. They'd all want, this and that, or they'd want to turn it into something else, or cut everybody except for Dan and Rorschach and just make it their story, or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
And
I can only imagine studio notes on something like Watchmen.
Oh, it was nightmarish, and in the end, Larry Gordon, the producer, had this amazing deal where he could take the movie away from the studio at any point if they weren't happy creatively, which nobody has that deal.
Yeah, it's a very special circumstance.
Well, he was the president of Fox when he made that deal for himself, I think, and then took the rights to Watchmen when he went to become an independent producer again. And so basically we would just push each studio to try to make the movie the way we wanted it made, and then eventually they'd be like, well, if you don't make these changes, we're not going to make the movie. And we'd say, okay, then we're going to another studio. And which was really a testament to Larry's commitment. Larry Gordon and Lloyd Levin, the other producer, their commitment to really, make it right and to make a real Watchmen movie.
Yeah.
And that was difficult, and it caused us to go through 4 different directors and 4 different studios, and a lot of notes and rewrites too. But in an effort to try to protect it and keep it Watchmen,
Yeah. Did you say it started at Paramount or Universal?
Started at Universal, and then we left Universal after about 1.5 years or so, and then we went to Revolution, Joe Roth's studio, and that's where Joe, gave me the money to go do the Watchmen test with Ian Glenn and Ray Stevenson that I just put out. And then they were like, I don't know if we can really see this movie. So then we went to Paramount, and at that point I said, okay, I'm going to step aside as director, because I just don't think they're going to let me. They're not going to give me.
So at this time you were attached as writer and director.
Yeah, at Universal and Revolution I was attached as writer and director, and then after Revolution I said, okay, why don't we get some big name director, and then at least we can get it made. But I was still on board writing the project. So we went to Paramount. That's when Paramount said, what about Darren Aronofsky? I said, I love Darren. I flew to, and I knew him a little bit, can't remember how, but just Hollywood. So I flew out to New York for a weekend and sat down with Darren, and we talked about the film, and it was very cool. And then I flew back, and then on the Monday, Paramount said, well, Darren's working on The Fountain, and he's not going to be available too soon, so we really want to make this movie right away. So what do you think about Paul Greengrass? So people don't know Paul Greengrass. He did United 93, and he did
the Bourne movies.
The Bourne movies and the Captain Phillips with Tom Hanks. And he's just this amazing. He's an amazing director all the way around, but he's amazing with action.
Yeah, great action director.
And he comes from documentaries, so very realistic documentary style filmmaker. And so then Paul signed on, and we all moved to London for many, many months. We set up at the Pinewood Studios to make the film there, And that got quite a ways along. We were casting, we were building the costumes, building the set, and Paul had like previs like 50 minutes of the movie. We had, Dr. Manhattan, the effects for Dr. Manhattan all worked out, and it was very, very cool. And then the president of Paramount came over and to check out everything, and they did. And then the next day we had a meeting, and the president of Paramount said, "We're canceling the movie. We're killing the movie."
Oh.
And we had already spent, millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And so, you're essentially dead at that point, because anybody else that picks it up has to pay back all that money.
Yeah.
And it was a huge, ugly scene, and everybody was screaming at everybody. And
do they give like a reason, or just like, we don't want to do it?
They were like, "Oh, we don't understand the script," and this and that, and
yeah.
But what happened was, so that guy, the studio president, so we were all screaming and yelling, and then we left his hotel room. He turned back on his phone and had a message to call Brad Gray, who was the CEO of Paramount. He was the head of the studio,
mm-hmm.
And so the president calls Brad Gray, and Brad says, essentially, you're fired. And Brad Gray had come into Paramount. I've never said this story on the record, but Brad Gray had come in to take over Paramount from Sherry Lansing, and he didn't want to do a big Sherry Lansing movie that he wasn't sure about.
Yeah,
meaning Watchmen. So he sent this guy, the studio president, to London to cancel the movie and take all the flack, but so that he would be out of town when Brad announced that he was firing him and bringing in Gail Berman.
It sounds like some personal vindictive stuff going on.
Well, I don't know if it was personal, but this is what studio presidents do when they come in and take over a studio. They don't want some huge expensive movie that their predecessor brought in case it doesn't work, and then they get blamed for somebody else's choice.
Yeah.
Or if it's a hit, then everybody says, "Oh, that's because Sherry Lansing was behind it." So there's really no upside for the new studio president. So it's personal, and it is vindictive, but it's really just the way that the business
just
goes.
A political move.
Yeah, and they had told me before, another one of the executives there had said, "We don't understand the script." And I said, "You do understand the script. I've got your notes. You clearly understand the script.
Yeah.
You're just afraid the audience won't understand it. And I'm telling you, they will. They'll feel smarter for having been presented a story this complex and this original." And but they were all afraid of it.
Was that a common thread bouncing from studio to studio? Is this, no audience is going to accept this?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, yeah, which you can understand why, and I understood why. It's hyper complex. It's very, very adult in its themes, and it's a twisted, 5-act. I don't even know if it's a 5-act movie. It might be a 7-act movie.
Yeah.
And enormously expensive and super long. And superhero movies were becoming big, but at this point it was, very simple, X-Men, Iron Man, things like the things that you just could grasp very easily.
And at this point, was it still early 2000s? So some of the genre hadn't quite exploded. It was still building.
Yeah, well, the MCU did not start until 2008 with Iron Man. That's when that was Marvel's first studio film, which I worked on as well.
Really?
I didn't get credit on it. I was denied the opportunity to arbitrate for credit on it, which is a shame.
Yeah, because it's based on percentage and things like that for people who don't know.
No, well, it is, but no, I was shut out because of some weird rule that said, it went from one studio to another.
Oh, okay.
So you can't arbitrate for credit. And I was like, yeah, but I wrote it for Marvel, and it was a big ugly thing.
Yeah.
So it wasn't about percentage. It was about some weird Writers Guild rule.
Oh, okay.
But But it's okay. It only cost me like $1 million and a huge credit. But I'm almost over it.
Almost.
So,
I mean, people don't even talk about that movie anymore. It's fine.
I know who even remembers who was cast as Iron Man.
I couldn't tell you.
Couldn't even tell you. So anyway, the point is that yes. So through most of the process, comic book movies were mostly just our X-Men films, and then I can't remember what else was coming out.
Spider-Man was shortly after X-Men.
The Hulk came out, which I also worked on.
Yeah, that was 2003.
Nobody liked that one. And
it has its charm.
And then, Well, it does. It's got some amazing things in it. But it wasn't the movie I had written, unfortunately. But So but they were coming out, and there were sort of hits and misses, and so it was very difficult for the studios to wrap their heads around this movie, which is primarily why I stepped aside as director. I was like, nobody is going to make this unless we get some A-list director who just says, "Trust me, this is going to be amazing," and that's of course eventually what happened.
Yeah,
when we found Zach.
For you, it was more about getting it made and not so much like I want to be the one.
No, I mean I did want to be the one, but mostly because I wanted it to honor Alan's book and Alan Moore's masterpiece, Alan and Dave Gibbons' masterpiece, and so I mostly wanted to do it to protect it, and also because I loved it so much that I felt that I understood the nuances of it better than most people. But again, I just didn't have a big enough name to get it into production.
Yeah. So you've glossed over a couple things here I wanna touch on. One being Alan Moore. Did you have conversations with him, like working? Because I mean, it's widely publicized how he discusses his work and adaptations of his work. I'm just curious what talking to him was like what he said about your script and things like that.
Yeah, some journalist gave me his phone number, and so I called him up and I told him who I was and what I was doing. I was at Universal when I first closed the deal, and I said, I'm adapting your masterpiece into a film, and I said, look, I'm aware of your disdain for Hollywood, and I respect it completely. I understand it, and I respect it, but I want to let you know that I'm doing this because of how much I love your work, and because I want the movie to open up the story to an even larger audience. I think the themes and the ideas and the storytelling in it, should be seen by the world. And I wanted to ask you if you had any desire to be involved or to advise me or write with me or whatever, to let you know that door is open. And he was so sweet to me. He was like, oh no, David, the book is my story and the movie is your story, but you give me a call anytime and ask me, if you've got any questions, you let me know. And I did. And so I called him a few times and asked about the story, and then I sent him the script when it was done. And then in an interview in Empire Magazine, he said, David Hayter's script is I can't remember exactly what he said, like the closest adaptation to Watchmen that I've ever read. That said, I shan't be seeing the movie.
The most Alan Moore answer.
Yeah, which was so kind of him to do, and he didn't have to do that. And so I always try to make it clear to people that, Alan Moore doesn't like Hollywood, doesn't like the adaptation machine. And I totally get that.
Yeah.
But he was so respectful of me as a writer and so kind to me. And, I never got any how dare you do this to my work or anything like that. He was very, very kind to me.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like he understands the business and sounds like a nice guy.
Yeah, well, I think he just respects writers and artists, and he was super nice. I mean, I don't know if he'd have been nice to the movie executives, but fortunately, that's not who I am.
I mean, does anybody want to
be nice to movie executives?
Yeah.
Some of them,
yeah.
You know, it's yeah, some of them are amazing. Some of them are super smart and brilliant collaborators, and others are not that. And so you've got to take it on a case by case basis.
Yeah. So the next thing I want to talk to you about, which is kind of the thing that started this whole conversation, was the test footage that you dropped. Something like this to me is super fascinating. I mean, this whole podcast is based around the what ifs of movies, and I feel like you're someone I could have many conversations with about this.
Oh, sure.
But yeah, it was super fascinating to see just like another look at what could have been. And you know, Ian Glenn, who I'm a huge fan of, and Ray Stevenson, who eventually went on to play the Punisher in a very underrated movie, in my opinion.
Yeah, everybody loves the Punisher.
Oh, I love that movie. It's so self-indulgent. It's amazing. But yeah, it was just really interesting footage. And I was kind of like reading through the tweets. Somebody was asking you questions about it. And I think it's all you said at one point Daniel Craig was cast as Rorschach.
Yeah, Daniel Craig. Yeah, so he was Rorschach, and we saw all kinds of amazing. Like, I was in London when we were casting it, and I met like Stannis Baratheon came in for Dan, and like all these actors that I didn't know at the time, and then they were all in Game of Thrones or what have you. I think Eddie Redmayne came in.
Oh, nice.
For us for Rorschach. There were a bunch of like amazing actors, but Daniel Craig, we said sure, I'll do it. And we met with him in at the Soho House in London, and so we were like, fantastic. So we got Daniel Craig, we got Ian Glenn, we were ready to go. We built the set, hired the crew, and then the day before, Craig called me up and said, yeah, I'm not doing it. I'm not feeling it.
Ugh.
And I was like, what? And he was like, yeah, just not feeling it. So sorry. And I don't even think he said sorry.
Yeah.
He just bailed. And I was like, we've already built the set. We've already hired everybody. Like, I'm mad about it to this day because there's only one rule as an actor, and that's the show must go on. And I've never seen anything that crappy.
Wow.
So
this was 2003, or when did this?
2003, yeah.
Okay.
So and it cost us thousands of dollars to bump it, and then we had to shoot the next week because the set was built. It was just sitting on the soundstage, so we had to shoot the next weekend after Craig bailed on us, and so Ray Stevenson. Can't remember how it ended up being Ray, but he and I had really hit it off, and so I was like, I couldn't get Eddie Redmayne back. I couldn't get all these amazing people we sort of passed over for Daniel Craig, but I called Ray and I was like, look, can you help us out? And he was so kind and said, yeah, sure, mate, I'm there. And so of course we had to get a gigantic trench coat, and
yeah, he's a large man.
Well, it's so funny because Rorschach is like a small guy.
Yeah.
And, and Daniel Craig's not a small guy, but he's about 5'10", and it would have been great. But Rorschach is just this hulking, 6'4" monster.
I mean, Ian Glenn looks pretty tall too. Is he?
He is.
Yeah. Okay.
So he's about 6'1", 6'2", and no, he's a tall guy, and so it's kind of balanced it out. But anyway, so so he came in, and Ray, a lot of the comments, the recent Twitter comments were like, oh, he's too controlled, or he's too, he's not crazy enough, or he's not whatever, and that may be, those may be valid criticisms, but
Well, it is just test footage, and also he came in last minute.
He came in last minute, and he's just such a lovely personality. And he's just got such a lovely, powerful, sort of friendly yet threatening way about him.
Yeah.
That I thought it was a cool. I thought he brought a really cool element to it. We recently, my wife and I recently rewatched all of Rome, which is just such an amazing series, and he's so great in it.
I never got around to that one, but my parents were super into that show when it was out.
Oh yeah, do yourself a favor. It's 2 seasons. It's amazing, and it's you see the precursor of Game of Thrones in that show. And Ray is the star. I mean, he and the other guy whose name I can't remember, which is terrible, but Kevin McKidd.
Oh, okay.
He and Kevin McKidd are the 2 stars, and they're amazing.
Yeah, I'll have to get around. I always forget about that one. So much to watch.
It's true.
So after Paul Greengrass, the movie shut down. Is that when you then go to Zach?
Yeah, well, that's when. So all this money was spent. I think we spent $7.5 million or something, and that was all sort of owing against the movie. Everything got torn down, all the preliminary sets, everything. And we left London, and we were all depressed, and we were running out of movie studios. And now we had this big price tag against it. And but then Warner Brothers figured out that because they own DC, they own the ancillary rights to any Watchmen stuff. So they would get the Rorschach soap on a rope or lunchboxes or whatever. They could make money off of those things, off of the toys and whatnot. So they picked it up, and they said, we've got this new director who's doing this movie for us, 300, and they brought us in to see an early cut of the film.
Oh, that was Warner Brothers, wasn't it?
Yeah, early footage of 300, and we were like, holy shit, this is spectacular. And it's a full-on Frank Miller comic book adaptation. Like, we're like, this is perfect.
Yeah.
And the studio was so fired up about Zach. They knew 300 was going to be a big hit. And so they were just willing to give him anything. And I was like, that's the situation that we needed, which is a superstar director who's in a point in his career where he can do anything, comic book fan, and somebody who loves Watchmen as much as we do. And so the stars aligned after 8-9 years of struggle, and the movie got greenlit.
Yeah, so I mean, you really like carried this movie for like 8 or 9 years until it finally hit the screen. Like, how?
Yeah, we really, it was me and Lloyd Levin and Larry Gordon for 9 years, really, just struggling to get it made. So it kind of annoys me when people say, oh, Hayter was attached for a year or something like that, and then he got fired, and they brought in Darren Aronofsky or whatever. It's like, no, I was there. I really, we got this made with our blood and sweat and the skin off our fingernails,
Yeah, and I have to thank you. I love that movie. It's, I wasn't as familiar with it when it came out. It's, it's one of my favorite comic book movies. It's, the style of it and everything. It always sticks with me. And I had his name, Jackie Earle Haley, as Rorschach is like perfect in my opinion.
He's cool. Yeah, he is. And then so I don't know if you saw on Twitter, but he tweeted back about.
Oh, I did not actually.
Yeah, so he after I put out the director's test, I got a tweet from Jackie, and he said, David Hayter awesomeness or something like that, and I was like, we were just waiting on the master, because Jackie was he was such an inspired casting. He just was Rorschach. He was just spectacular in that film.
It's interesting because you mentioned some of the casting, obviously Ian Glenn, Ray Stevenson, and I believe you mentioned Denzel as Dr. Manhattan.
Yeah.
At one point?
Yeah. Well, I felt like first of all, Dr. Manhattan is a man who thinks he's becoming God.
Yeah.
And I was like, you need somebody who's got like godlike presence and God level confidence. And I also thought it was interesting that, as an African American actor, we all come from the cradle of Africa, and I thought it'd be interesting if an African American actor played the first God, basically. And plus he's Denzel Washington. He's just fucking
he's great.
Badass.
And this is like right after Training Day when you first start this project, so.
Yeah. So I don't think any of us ever spoke to him about it, but that's who I was pushing at Paramount for Dr. Manhattan. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I also wanted John Cusack as Dan.
Which I saw that as well. That would have been great.
Yeah, he's just so Yeah. I mean, he's John Cusack. He's incredible.
Grosse Point Blank is one of my favorite movies. Like,
Grosse Point Blank is, I think, I've never had this experience so much with a movie, but that's a movie where I was like, oh my God, I wish I had written that movie.
Oh my God.
Why didn't I think to write that movie?
I say the same thing every time I see Tron Legacy. So.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's the one movie. Is like, oh, I wish I could have made that. Like, it's so incredible, but then it wouldn't be as credible as I love. So, yeah.
Well, you never know.
Oh, true.
It would be. Maybe you would love it more because you would be collecting the residual.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, I hope there's a lot of residuals for that. That's like I think one of the most underrated movies. So.
Oh, I don't even think I've seen it.
Oh my gosh, it's if you got the Disney Plus, it's right. It was the first thing I watched.
Oh, there you go. I'll check it out.
Yeah. I mean.
So, and I can't remember any of the other casting that I wanted at the time. Yeah, those are the only ones that really stand out to me.
Yeah.
But if he hadn't screwed us over, I think Daniel Craig would have made a great Watchmen or a great Rorschach.
Yeah. I'm a big Craig fan. I mean, mostly through the Bond movies, but it would have been interesting to see him as a Rorschach. Sad to hear how he just kind of left you hanging, though. Kind of paints a picture of him.
He did leave me hanging, and I am not a Daniel Craig fan because of it. But
understandable.
Whatever.
I mean, this is so interesting. This has been great. I'm curious if you're watching the HBO series at all.
I am okay. Indeed.
I sadly have not. All my coworkers are watching it and they're talking nonstop about it. I was very skeptical when the trailer came out, and then when the reviews when the reviews started hitting, I was like, oh, maybe this is something to watch, and it sounds like it's the best season of television, because I think did they just have their last episode, or do they have one more? Or?
I think so. I think episode 8 was the last one, and they're saying maybe that's it. Like they'll do one.
I think it was only supposed to be 8.
But the response has been so huge. I have a feeling that they may make them do it again. I watched the whole thing. It's really interesting. I was also skeptical. Well, I mean, just mostly because I was like, I would hate to take on Watchmen without the original story.
Yeah,
because it's not just the world and the characters. It's that clockwork story that just is so beautifully constructed. And so I was like, what are they going to do with it? But I've been emailing back and forth with Lloyd Levin, who is producer of the movie, and he's also listed as a producer on the TV show. And we've been sort of debating some of the things that we liked or didn't like or whatever. But as it's gone on, I really got hooked into it, and it's so, it's like I don't know how anybody can understand it if they didn't spend 9 years working on the movie. It's really inside baseball Watchmen. I mean, it's the little details of it are incredible, and the acting is amazing. The production of it is spectacular. It's so beautiful, and it really feels like a Watchmen world. In a way that I didn't think was possible. So yeah, you should check it out. It's if you really know the source material, it's very, very cool.
Yeah, I'm like dying to see it, but my day job has like been keeping me away. But my coworkers, like,
Sure.
they're giving me non-spoiler details, but some things have been slightly spoiled just by the nature of social media, and I'm like super excited to get into it.
Yeah, I think you'll dig it. It's weird. It's unusual, and again, very adult and very complex, and it's a pretty amazing achievement.
Yeah, that's like the next thing on my list. The only thing I've been able to keep up with lately is Mandalorian, just because those are like very short episodes.
Yeah, yes, indeed.
Yeah, it's been so great to talk to you, and it's interesting to hear your path through. Like, you've touched a lot of comic book movies in your time.
I have indeed. And we got Black Widow coming up.
Yeah, and I had heard recently that you had done a pass on Black Widow at some point.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was attached to write and direct it for a year at Lionsgate in 2004. So, yeah, I've got a number of drafts of that lying around.
Are you aware of anything that you worked on is in this version, or have you, like, do you ever get contacted about anything like that?
They will probably contact me as a participating writer in the credit arbitration process. I don't really know. I don't know anything more about it than anybody else. I've just seen the trailers. Yeah. It depends on how if there's any similarities between my scripts and what's happened since. So I have no idea.
Yeah. Really. That's actually the Marvel movie I'm most excited for, honestly, next to Doctor Strange. Yeah, I'm a big fan of spy stuff, so like looking at Black Widow, I'm like, oh, it kind of looks like a James Bondy type movie, so I'm into that.
That's what I did. At the top of my script, it says Black Widow, a Marvel spy movie. And
yeah,
that was always the angle that we were gonna take.
Yeah, I would love to read that. All right, so
I think it's out there. It's online somewhere.
Oh, I'll have to track that down. I'm always looking for stuff, and I got people sending me stuff here and there. It's like I don't even know what I have sometimes.
Right.
So I wanna end off on a couple of questions.
Sure.
With all these comic book movies you touched, is there like the next one out there? It's like, ooh, this is the one that I'd really like to do, like to get out, like to be involved in.
Yeah. Well, I get that question a lot. The problem is I can't say, if I say in public something that I'm really interested in, then other people move to do it, or it just complicates my ability to do it. And plus, pretty much everything, all of my dream projects are in process in one way or another, because everybody's trying to make every comic book ever made.
True.
So yes. So the short answer is yes. I have a number of dream projects I'd like to take on, but I just can't really. Yeah. There's no real upside to talking about it in public until it becomes a thing.
Yeah, I understand. And the other one, just like, me as the fanboy that I am, that was it true you took a shot at a Metal Gear movie years ago?
Yeah, I was brought in. So Avi Arad, who was the producer on the X-Men film, used to be president of Marvel. He called me up and said, "We're doing the Metal Gear movie at Sony, and I want to bring you in as the writer." And so I was like, "Well, that makes sense." And
my heart.
Right. What the hell? So I came up with so we started developing the movie. I came up with a pitch, and then we found out that like Konami Japan had made a deal with like Avi, and Konami US had made a deal with Mike DeLuca, and they weren't really talking to each other about it. So then we found out that Mike was attached as well, and he was at Sony. And so Avi and I went in and I pitched the movie to Mike, and and it was a pretty solid pitch. In fact, it sounds like the movie they're talking about making now is
Yeah.
very similar to what I had pitched. Not because we came up with similar ideas, not because they copied me or anything. But we pitched it to DeLuca, and he was like, "Oh, that's great." And then they immediately said, "Oh, it's not happening." I think because Avi and Mike couldn't work out a deal together, or something. It was just personal politics, and unfortunately, it fell apart. But I do want to make clear, I did not write a script for a Metal Gear movie. That does not exist. I came up with a 15-page pitch, and that's it. And maybe I'll share it someday after the movie comes out. But
that's my white whale.
But that was the extent of my involvement. It was really just a couple of days of development, and then a pitch, and then it was dead.
Yeah. I mean, that was me as a kid, just like nights on the internet reading rumors and stuff like, oh, I wonder if any of this is true.
Well, now you know the truth.
Yeah. Well, sad that a script doesn't exist, because that's always one I've hoped to stumble across. But, hopefully that after, that movie gets made, because I'd love to see it. And
I hope so. I had drinks with Jordan Vogt Roberts, the director, and we talked about it for like 4 hours. And, he's so committed to it, and he really understands it. And so I think he would make a great movie out of it.
Yeah.
Hopefully that'll get made.
I don't know if you saw his big Twitter thing a week ago when they put out the Black Widow trailer. He was comparing the outfit to the outfit from The Boss, and like.
Oh yeah. He sent me a DM about it, just complaining about it.
Yeah, it was. He ended it by tagging like, "I just turned in a new draft." So hopefully that's still moving forward at a good pace.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah, I loved his Kong Skull Island, so that movie was a lot of fun. So.
Yeah, it was really fun. It was beautiful and really well executed.
Yeah. So hopefully that happens.
Indeed.
So sorry to keep holding you, but final question, I guess. If any choice, who to play Snake in your opinion?
He should be CG, and it should be me.
I've always just wondered, like, what if they just did the voiceover? And like, I understand that's not like, there have been cases of things like that, but
yeah, but I doubt like Oscar Isaac is
of course
appreciate me dubbing over his voice or anything like that. I always like Hugh Jackman, just because I love Hugh, and he's a guy,
great.
And he's an amazing action star, and he looks like the character. I think he'd be great, but there's a number of people I think would be good.
For years I was always Christian Bale, but now the new Oscar Isaac poll, I'm like kind of leaning in that camp.
Yeah, well, he's extremely talented, and I think he'd bring a good amount of humanity to it. Yeah. That's really the key, It's anybody can be a tough guy. It's just it's a matter of sort of nailing the fact that Snake does these things because he cares, and he can't stop himself from putting himself in harm's way. And Oscar Isaac is a really empathetic actor. He'd be great.
Oh yeah, you think he would believe that love could bloom on a battlefield? So.
That's right. That's right.
All right. Well,
I think you're right.
I'll let you go. I've taken up enough of your time. I greatly appreciate this. It was a really fun conversation. Learned a lot about Watchmen. As you know.
Good. Thank you, Jeremy. The questions were great, and I really appreciate the chance to clarify some of the history for people. I apologize. I was a little saltier here than I typically am in my public persona, but I got some things off my chest, and I appreciate the opportunity to do so.
Oh, no problem. I was more than happy to provide the opportunity. And, if you have any other, movie projects that you want to talk about, you're always welcome back.
Well, thank you, my friend. I did work on the first season of Warrior Nun, which is coming out on Netflix early next year, and so people can check that out. And hopefully I'll have this other show on CBS next year as well, which we just sold. So keep an eye out for more Hayter goodness.
Oh, of course. So that was called Warrior Nun?
Warrior Nun, yeah.
Okay.
It's based on adapted from the graphic novel by Ben Dunn.
Okay. Oh, I've not heard of that one. I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, it's kind of cool.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, Jeremy. You too. Stay warm.
I'm gonna try.
And Jeremy,
Yeah.
you're pretty good.
Oh man. It's like my childhood speaking right to me.
There you go. All right, pal.
All right.
Well, have a good one, and thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you.
Talk
All right.
to you later.
Bye.